What if everything we believe about the dawn of civilization is wrong? What if the first cities, the first temples, the first written records were never the beginning at all, but merely the moment when a memory far more ancient finally found a way to preserve itself? We have been taught to believe in a linear, orderly history. First came the hunter-gatherers, small nomadic bands following herds of animals across wild landscapes. Then came agriculture, the discovery that seeds could be planted and harvested. With agriculture came settlement, and from settlement arose the earliest villages. Villages grew into cities. Cities developed writing, organized religion, mathematics, astronomy. And thus, civilization was born. It is an elegant narrative. It makes sense. It progresses from simple to complex, from primitive to sophisticated. But there is a problem. The archaeological evidence does not fit this story. There are pieces left over, fragments that belong to no known puzzle. And there is one region of the world where these anomalies concentrate with disturbing density. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the supposed birthplace of civilization. But what archaeologists have discovered in recent decades suggests that Mesopotamia was not the beginning. It was a restart, a new chapter written upon the ashes of something that came before, something that should not have existed according to our accepted chronologies, something the Sumerians themselves, in their most ancient texts, described as a world before the flood. Tonight, we will venture into that lost world. We will explore the millennia that preceded the first Sumerian cities. We will follow the footprints of forgotten cultures whose names we have reconstructed from pottery fragments and temple foundations buried beneath layers of sediment. We will seek answers to questions that perhaps should never have been asked, because there is something unsettling hidden in the soil of Mesopotamia. Something archaeologists unearthed that changed everything we thought we knew. And tonight, we are going to discover what it was. In southeastern Turkey, roughly 15 kilometers from the city of Şanlıurfa, there is a hill that locals call Göbekli Tepe. In Turkish, the name means potbelly hill or navel hill. For centuries, the farmers of this region avoided the place. They said there was something strange about the stones that jutted from the ground, that these were not natural rocks, that someone had put them there. In 1963, a team of American archaeologists conducted a surface survey of the area as part of a broader regional study. They noticed the stones but dismissed them quickly. They assumed they were gravestones from a Byzantine medieval cemetery. Nothing important, nothing that warranted excavation. The report was filed away and the hill was forgotten. More than 3 decades passed. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was working on a project nearby when he decided to visit this place he had read about in old reports. He climbed the hill as the afternoon light fell across the Germush Mountains. What he saw took his breath away. These were not medieval tombstones. They were massive pillars of carved limestone, decorated with reliefs of animals that seemed to observe him from across the millennia. Foxes with extended tails, wild boars with threatening tusks, intertwined serpents, scorpions with raised stingers, vultures with spread wings, and shapes that appeared human, but not quite. Stylized T-shaped figures representing something Schmidt could not identify with certainty. The following year, excavations began. What emerged from the earth would rewrite the textbooks on human prehistory. Göbekli Tepe was built approximately 12,000 years ago, between 9,600 and 8,200 BCE. To put this in perspective, it is 7,000 years older than the first Sumerian cities. It is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. It predates established agriculture, predates pottery, predates metallurgy, predates any known form of writing. According to everything we thought we knew about human evolution, Göbekli Tepe should not exist. At that time, according to the traditional narrative, humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They lived in small family groups, following seasonal animals, collecting fruits and roots. They had no permanent settlements, no monumental architecture, no social organization required for large-scale construction projects. And yet, there it stood, a complex of circular structures, each surrounded by T-shaped pillars weighing up to 16 tons each. The pillars were extracted from limestone quarries hundreds of meters away, transported without wheels or domesticated pack animals, and erected with mathematical precision. Then they were carved with stone tools, creating three-dimensional reliefs of an artistic quality that would not be seen again for millennia. To date, only about 5% of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed at least 15 to 20 additional stone circles buried beneath the surface. Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated temple. It is a massive complex, possibly the oldest ceremonial center in the world. Schmidt proposed a theory that inverted everything archaeologists thought they knew. First came the temple, then the city. Traditionally, it was believed that religion and temples were a product of civilization. First humans developed agriculture, then they formed permanent settlements, then they developed complex social structures, and only then did they build temples. Göbekli Tepe suggests exactly the opposite. The need to create sacred spaces, to gather for rituals, to build monuments that would transcend individual lives preceded everything else. And this need to come together, to work collectively on a common project, may have been the catalyst that led to agriculture, to permanent settlements, to civilization itself. But there is something even more unsettling about Göbekli Tepe. After approximately 1,600 years of use, the entire complex was deliberately buried. Layer upon layer of sediment was carefully packed around the pillars. It was not abandoned and forgotten. It was intentionally preserved, as if someone wanted to protect it, as if someone knew a time would come when it would be necessary to remember. The motifs carved on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe are a catalogue of the wildlife of that era. Foxes, wild boars, gazelles, deer, onagers, snakes, scorpions, spiders, vultures, cranes. Some animals are depicted with extraordinary realism, with anatomical details that demonstrate intimate knowledge of their forms and behaviors. Others are stylized, reduced to geometric shapes that seem more like symbols than representations. There are figures that defy interpretation, human hands carved in relief, figures that might be severed heads, animals in postures that seem to tell stories we cannot read. And at the center of each circle, two pillars larger than the rest, facing each other as if in conversation or confrontation. What did all this mean? What rituals were performed in these stone circles? What beliefs motivated hundreds of people to work together for generations to create something so monumental? Klaus Schmidt believed Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage center, a sacred place where hunter-gatherer groups from throughout the region came to participate in ceremonies. The stone tools found at the site show styles from different cultural traditions, as if people from various communities gathered here periodically. And the symbols carved on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, those animals, those geometric patterns, reappear thousands of years later in Sumer. The intertwined serpents, the scorpions with raised tails, the vultures with spread wings, they are the same motifs, as if there were a cultural continuity, a transmission of knowledge across 7,000 years. Who built Göbekli Tepe? And what was it they wished to preserve? To understand what happened in Mesopotamia before written history, we need to follow the trail of pottery. It may seem like a mundane subject, but fragments of fired clay are the fingerprints of vanished cultures. Every people, Every period, every cultural tradition had its own way of forming, decorating, and firing their vessels. And by studying these patterns, archaeologists have been able to reconstruct a sequence of civilizations extending much further back than we ever imagined. The first of these forgotten cultures is known as Hassuna. It takes its name from the site of Tel Hassuna in northern Iraq, where its remains were first excavated. The Hassuna peoples lived between approximately 6,000 and 5,500 BCE. They were the first farmers of northern Mesopotamia. They had settled in the foothills of mountains where sufficient rain fell to allow dry farming. Hassuna villages were small, adobe houses of 3 or 4 rooms built around central courtyards, ovens for baking bread, silos for storing grain, stone tools for harvesting cereals, bones of domesticated animals revealing a diet based on sheep, goats, and pigs. They lived modest lives, working the land, raising animals, making pottery decorated with linear designs in reddish paint on a cream background. There is no evidence of monumental temples at Hassuna sites, no clear signs of social hierarchy or class differentiation. They were egalitarian communities of related families who shared a common culture defined by their distinctive pottery. But the Hassuna were not alone in the region. At the same time, in the drier plains of central Iraq, another culture flourished known as Samarra. The Samarrans were more sophisticated in some respects. Their pottery displayed more elaborate designs, including complex geometric figures and stylized representations of animals and humans. And most importantly, they had developed primitive irrigation systems that allowed them to cultivate areas where rainfall was insufficient. The Samarra culture represents a crucial step in Mesopotamia's history. It is the first evidence that humans were manipulating water flow to expand cultivable land. This technology would later become fundamental to development in the southern alluvial plains, where rain was scarce, but the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided abundant water. And then came the Halaf culture. The Halaf peoples lived between approximately 6,100 and 5,100 BCE, spreading across all of northern Mesopotamia from Turkey to Iraq. Their name comes from the site of Tel Halaf in northern Syria, where archaeologist Max von Oppenheim conducted excavations between 1911 and 1927. Halaf pottery is extraordinary. It is so fine, so beautifully decorated, that when the first specimens arrived at European museums, many experts refused to believe they could be so ancient. The designs are intricate geometric patterns painted in multiple colors on thin-walled vessels fired at surprisingly high temperatures. There are plates and bowls with decorations that resemble mandalas, symmetrical patterns of hypnotic complexity. The Halaf also created the first known seals in the Near East, small pieces of carved stone with geometric designs that were pressed into wet clay to leave a distinctive mark. These seals suggest concepts of private property, personal identity, transactions that needed to be authenticated. They are indications of a more complex society than their material technology would suggest. But perhaps the most significant thing about the Halaf culture is its geographic reach. The same distinctive pottery appears at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. This indicates a network of contacts, of trade, of cultural exchange spanning an immense region. The Halaf peoples were not isolated villages. They were part of something larger, a shared cultural sphere extending from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Iran. How did they communicate across these distances? What united them? What beliefs did they share? These questions have no definitive answers. The Halaf culture left no written texts, only pottery, seals, figurines, and the foundations of their distinctive circular houses called tholoi. And then, around 5000 BCE, the Halaf culture disappears. There are no signs of violent destruction, no evidence of invasion. Simply, in a relatively short period, Halaf pottery ceased to be produced and was replaced by a new style, the Ubaid style. For millennia, southern Mesopotamia was an inhospitable place. The alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates were extensive marshes, wetlands that flooded with spring rises and dried under the scorching summer sun. There was no stone for building, no wood for fuel. The climate was extreme, with summers where temperatures exceeded 40 degrees Celsius and rainfall almost non-existent outside brief seasons. As we explore this mystery of Mesopotamia's lost civilizations, I would love to know from which part of the world you are joining us on this nocturnal journey. Are you in the United States, listening as ancient history unfolds beneath your night sky? Or perhaps in Europe, where some of these ancient trade routes once reached? Maybe in Australia, where the day is just beginning while we travel back through time? Leave a comment below telling me your location. I am fascinated to imagine how this tale of the first world reaches corners across the planet as the night advances. And yet, it was in this seemingly hostile landscape that something extraordinary was born. Geologists and climatologists have reconstructed the conditions that existed in southern Mesopotamia during the Ubaid period. It was not the desert we see today. It was a world of water. Extensive lagoons, meandering rivers, reed beds stretching to the horizon. Sea levels were higher, and the Persian Gulf extended much further inland than it does currently. In this aquatic environment, communities of fishermen and reed gatherers had lived for millennia, adapting to a unique ecosystem. They built their houses on platforms of woven reeds. They navigated in reed boats through natural channels. They hunted waterfowl and caught fish with nets and traps. It was a way of life that required specialized skills and deep knowledge of the environment. When the Ubaid peoples appeared in the archaeological record, they incorporated these aquatic traditions but added something new: large-scale irrigation agriculture. They learned to control the waters that had once controlled them. They built dikes, dug canals, created systems to store and distribute water. They transformed wild marshes into cultivated fields and organized villages. This process of domesticating the landscape did not happen overnight. It took generations of experimentation, of trial and error, of accumulated and transmitted knowledge. But the result was a radical transformation. Where before there was only water and reeds, permanent communities emerged with temples, storehouses, and increasingly complex social organization. The Ubaid culture appeared in southern Mesopotamia around 6,500 BCE. Its name comes from the small mound of Tel al-Ubaid, near the ruins of the ancient city of Ur, where British archaeologists Henry Hall and Leonard Woolley excavated the first specimens of their characteristic pottery in the early decades of the 20th century. What makes the Ubaid culture special is not just its antiquity, it is what it represents. For the first time in human history, we see the emergence of a pattern that would become the foundation of all subsequent civilizations. The Ubaid peoples built the first permanent temples of Mesopotamia. At sites like Eridu, Tel el-Weli, Ur, and Uruk, archaeologists have discovered religious structures that were rebuilt again and again in the same place for centuries, each new version larger and more elaborate than the one before. These were not simple domestic shrines. They were public buildings intended for communal worship, focal centers of social and religious life. The Ubaid also developed more sophisticated irrigation systems than any that existed before, canals that carried water from rivers to distant fields, dikes that controlled flooding, sluices that regulated flow. This technology transformed unproductive marshes into fertile agricultural land that could feed ever larger populations, and for the first time, we see clear evidence of occupational specialization. Not all inhabitants of a Ubaid village did the same thing. There were craftsmen specialized in pottery production. Others dedicated themselves to weaving, others to incipient metallurgy. And there were people who seemed to dedicate themselves exclusively to religious activities, possibly the first priests in human history. Ubaid pottery is distinctive and easy to recognize. These are vessels of cream or greenish color, decorated with geometric designs painted in dark tones. Triangles, wavy lines, zigzag patterns. Unlike the elaborate Halaf pottery, Ubaid vessels have a more utilitarian, more standardized appearance. This suggests production on a larger scale, possibly for commercial exchange in addition to domestic use. The most surprising thing about the Ubaid culture is its expansion. From its origin in southern Mesopotamia, the Ubaid style gradually spread northward, absorbing or replacing local traditions. Halaf pottery disappeared not because its peoples were conquered or destroyed, but because they adopted the Ubaid culture. They integrated into a broader system, into a way of life that seemed to offer advantages the earlier traditions did not provide. To the east, the Ubaid peoples reached the shores of the Persian Gulf. Archaeologists have found Ubaid pottery at sites in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. This indicates the Ubaid were seafarers. They built vessels and used them to trade along the Gulf coasts. The site of H3 in Kuwait has provided the earliest known evidence of maritime navigation in the world. To the west, Ubaid influence reached Syria. To the north, the mountains of Anatolia. In each place, local culture was transformed by contact with the Ubaid pattern. Temples, pottery, funerary practices, everything began to look alike. For the first time in human history, a relatively uniform culture extended over an immense geographic region. This did not happen through military conquest. There is no evidence that the Ubaid were warriors. It happened through something more subtle, more profound. It happened because the Ubaid system worked. It produced agricultural surpluses, allowed specialization, created exchange networks that benefited all participants. It was, in a sense, the first integrated economic system in history. And at the heart of this system, at the southern extreme of cultivable lands, near where the fresh waters of the Euphrates met the salty waters of the Persian Gulf, there was a city that the Sumerians themselves, thousands of years later, would remember as the place where everything began. Eridu. Eridu. In Sumerian, it was written Nun.ki, meaning powerful city or city of wisdom. The Sumerians called it the first of all cities, the place where civilization descended from heaven. This was not empty rhetoric. For them, Eridu held a profound, almost mystical significance. It was the place where the gods first touched the earth. The site of Eridu, known today as Tel Abu Shahrain, lies about 20 kilometers southwest of the ruins of Ur in the far south of Iraq. When the first archaeologists arrived at this place in the 19th century, they found a desolate landscape of sand and scrub, with no apparent trace of the grandeur the ancient texts described. But beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered, lay one of the most important archaeological sequences in human history. Systematic excavations began in 1946, directed by Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar and Briton Seton Lloyd. What they found exceeded all expectations. Beneath the remains of an unfinished ziggurat from the 3rd millennium BCE, they discovered layer upon layer of earlier temples, 18 superimposed construction levels, each representing a reconstruction or expansion of the previous temple. And the deepest levels dated to the Ubaid period, to the 5th millennium BCE. The oldest temple at Eridu, level 18, was a modest structure, a small room approximately 4 by 5 meters, built with sun-dried mud bricks. It had a niche in one wall where a cult statue was probably placed, and a small pedestal or altar in front of the niche. On the floor, archaeologists found remains of offerings, fish bones and ashes scattered around the altar. This simple room, built approximately 7,500 years ago, is the oldest known temple in Mesopotamia. And what makes it even more significant is that it was built in the same place again and again for more than 1,500 years. Each generation rebuilt the temple on the foundations of the previous one, making it larger, more elaborate. The original cult niche became a central cella. The small room transformed into a complex of ceremonial halls. And eventually, the mound of debris from previous constructions became an elevated platform, the first ziggurat in history. The god of Eridu was Enki, later known to the Akkadians as Ea. He was the lord of fresh water flowing beneath the earth, the god of wisdom, magic, and the arts and sciences. His temple was called E-Abzu, the house of the watery abyss, because it was believed that beneath the temple lay the Abzu, the underground ocean of fresh water that fed all the springs and rivers of the world. Enki was a peculiar god in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Unlike other deities who appeared distant and capricious, Enki was described as a benefactor of humanity. He was the one who had taught humans the arts of civilization. He was the one who protected them when other gods wanted to destroy them. And he was the one who created the seven sages, the Apkallu, semi-divine beings who emerged from the sea to transmit knowledge to mortals. The temple of Enki at Eridu was not merely a place of worship. It was the center of an entire cosmology. The Sumerians believed that at the beginning of time, before cities existed, before humans knew how to cultivate or build, knowledge had descended from heaven to Eridu. Kingship had begun there. Civilization was born there. Everything the Sumerians knew and everything they were traced back to that sacred place in the southern marshes. But Eridu was not only important for religious reasons. It was also a center of technological innovation. Archaeologists have discovered that during the Ubaid period, Eridu functioned as an important ceramic production center. Kilns, firing waste, and large quantities of pottery fragments have been found indicating production on an industrial scale for that era. The inhabitants of Eridu were also pioneers in mud brick construction techniques. They developed methods for making bricks of standardized dimensions, which allowed for larger and more stable constructions. This technical knowledge would later spread throughout Mesopotamia and become the basis of architecture for all subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations. The location of Eridu was not accidental either. It was situated at the edge of the marshes, at a point where the fresh water of the Euphrates met the brackish waters of the Persian Gulf. This position made it a natural commercial node, a place where products from the northern highlands could be exchanged with maritime goods from the south. Shells from the Gulf, dried fish, bitumen for waterproofing vessels, all this flowed through Eridu. And there was something more. In the waters surrounding Eridu swam freshwater fish that the inhabitants considered sacred. Offerings of carp bones and other species have been found in the oldest levels of the temple. For the inhabitants of Eridu, fish were not merely food. They were messengers of the god Enki, creatures of the watery abyss that connected the mortal world with the realm of subterranean wisdom. This association between fish, water, and divine wisdom would become one of the most persistent themes in Mesopotamian mythology. The Apkallu, the sages who taught civilization to humans, were frequently depicted with fish-like characteristics. They emerged from the water to transmit knowledge and returned to the abyss when their mission was complete. It was as if the sea itself were the source of all wisdom, and Eridu, in its position between the waters, was the point where that wisdom touched the earth. But here is the question the Sumerian texts compel us to ask. If Eridu was the beginning, where did the knowledge transmitted there come from? If the Apkallu taught civilization to humans, who taught the Apkallu? The Sumerians themselves had an answer that has puzzled scholars for more than a century. In the most ancient texts of Mesopotamia, there are references to beings called Apkallu in Akkadian or Abgal in Sumerian. They were 7 sages, antediluvian masters, semi-divine creatures who had existed before the Great Flood that, according to the Mesopotamians, devastated the world in remote times. Their description is extraordinary and disturbing. The Apkallu were depicted in 3 distinct forms in Mesopotamian art. Some appeared as men wearing fish skin, with the fish's head over their own head like a hood and the tail hanging down their back. Others were shown as beings with eagle heads and human bodies, with wings that allowed them to ascend to heaven. And still others appeared in completely human form, but with distinctive garments that marked them as different from ordinary mortals. The most famous of these sages was Uana, known in later Greek sources as Oannes. According to tradition preserved by the Babylonian priest Berossus in the 3rd century BCE, Oannes was an extraordinary creature with a fish's body but a man's head, hands, and feet beneath his aquatic form. He emerged from the Persian Gulf at dawn and spent the days teaching the humans who lived on the shores. What did he teach them? Everything. According to Berossus, Oannes instructed humanity in writing, mathematics, geometry, agriculture, architecture, laws, the establishment of territorial boundaries, and the sowing and harvesting of cereals. In short, he taught them all the arts of civilization. And when night fell, Oannes submerged again into the sea, because he was an amphibious being who could not survive permanently on dry land. During the reigns of the 7 antediluvian kings, the 7 Apkallu served as counselors. Each sage was associated with a specific king and a specific city. Tradition linked them with the founding of the 7 most ancient cities of Sumer, Eridu, Ur, Nippur, Kulab, Kesh, Lagash, and Shuruppak. They were not merely teachers, they were the architects of civilization itself, those who had established the blueprints according to which human society should be organized. There is an Akkadian text known as Bit Meseri, the protected house, which is an exorcism ritual designed to drive evil from homes. In this text appears a list of the 7 Apkallu with their names and characteristics. The 7th and last of them, Utuabzu, is described in a particularly significant way. It is said that he ascended to heaven. He did not die as humans died. He was elevated to the celestial realms. This story has disturbing parallels with other traditions. The biblical patriarch Enoch, who was the 7th from Adam, was also taken to heaven without experiencing death. And Enoch, in later Jewish traditions, was described as the first man to learn writing, astronomy, and other arts of knowledge. The similarities are too specific to be coincidence. Scholars have debated for decades about the nature of the Apkallu. For some, they are simply mythological figures, personifications of the gradual process by which humans developed the technologies of civilization. For others, they represent a cultural memory of real teachers, perhaps members of a more advanced culture who came into contact with more primitive peoples and transmitted knowledge to them. And for still others, they are evidence of something more mysterious, something our modern categories of thought cannot adequately explain. What we know with certainty is that the Mesopotamians firmly believed in the reality of these sages. They depicted them in stone reliefs, decorating palaces and temples. They placed Apkallu figurines in building foundations to protect them. They invoked their names in healing and purification rituals. For them, the Apkallu were not characters in a fairy tale. They were the founders of everything they knew. And there was something more. The Apkallu were described as the guardians of knowledge from before the flood. They had preserved the wisdom of the ancient world through the catastrophe. They had transmitted that knowledge to subsequent humanity so it would not be lost forever. They were, in a sense, archaeologists of a lost era, excavators of a memory reaching back to unthinkable times. What memory was that? Where did it come from? To find answers, we need to examine what the Sumerians believed about the world before the flood. The Sumerian king list is one of the most extraordinary documents antiquity has bequeathed to us. It is a chronological record that purports to enumerate all the rulers who governed Sumer from the beginning of time. The most complete version is found in the Weld-Blundell Prism, a clay piece approximately 20 centimeters tall with 4 faces inscribed in cuneiform writing, currently preserved in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The document begins with words that have resonated across the millennia. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. What follows is a list of 8 kings who ruled before the flood. Their reigns are measured in units called sars, of 3,600 years, nirs, of 600 years, and sosses, of 60 years. The resulting figures are astronomical. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years. The second, Alalgar, also of Eridu, reigned for 36,000 years. The 8 antediluvian kings ruled in 5 successive cities for a total period of 241,200 years. Then comes the line that separates 2 eras. The flood swept over the land. After the flood, kingship descends again from heaven, this time to the city of Kish. The reigns of post-diluvian kings are still long by our standards, but are much shorter than the antediluvians. And as the list advances in time, the durations grow shorter until they reach more recognizable proportions. Modern scholars have debated extensively how to interpret these numbers. Some consider them purely symbolic, with no relationship to actual durations. Others have proposed that they represent dynasties or lineages rather than individuals, or that ancient scribes made errors translating figures from one numerical system to another. There are those who suggest the original durations were written in a decimal system, later misinterpreted as sexagesimal, which would multiply the figures by a considerable factor. But beyond debates about numbers, there is something undeniable in the Sumerian king list. It preserves a memory of a world prior to a catastrophe that changed everything. A world where rulers lived impossibly long lives, a world that was erased from the face of the earth and had to begin anew. If this journey through humanity's most ancient mysteries is proving fascinating, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Each week, we explore together the secrets official history prefers to ignore, the questions archaeology cannot answer, the enigmas that continue to challenge our understanding of the past. Your subscription helps us continue unraveling these mysteries in future nights. The flood narrative in Mesopotamian tradition is nearly 2,000 years older than the biblical account of Noah. It is found in multiple versions, including the Genesis of Eridu, the Epic of Atrahasis, and the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. In all these versions, the essential details are consistent. The gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood. The reasons vary according to the text. In some versions, humans had become too numerous and noisy, disturbing the gods' rest. In others, they had committed some moral offense that required punishment. But one god, Enki the Wise, decided to save humanity. He secretly warned a righteous man about the impending catastrophe. This man received instructions to build a boat of specific dimensions. He was to waterproof it with bitumen, load it with his family and specimens of all living creatures, and seal the door. The rains began, the waters rose. For endless days, the flood covered the earth. When finally the waters began to recede, the boat ran aground on a mountain. The survivor released birds to determine if dry land had appeared. Finally, he disembarked and offered a sacrifice to the gods, who gathered around the sweet aroma and promised never to destroy humanity that way again. The parallels with the biblical account are evident, and scholars have convincingly demonstrated that the Hebrew version derived from the older Mesopotamian versions, adapting them to a monotheistic context. But what interests us here is not the comparison of religious texts. It is the question of what real event, if any, could have inspired this universal memory of a catastrophic flood. Modern science has confirmed that approximately 11,600 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, there was an abrupt and dramatic climate change known as the Younger Dryas period. The glaciers covering much of the northern hemisphere melted rapidly, possibly accelerated by comet fragment impacts or changes in ocean patterns. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters in a geologically short period. If a coastal civilization existed before this event, it would have been devastated. Its cities, its ports, its cultivated fields, all would have been submerged beneath the waters. The survivors would have fled inland, carrying with them only what they could carry and the memories of a lost world. Göbekli Tepe was built precisely in this period, just after the Younger Dryas, in the mountains of southeastern Turkey, far from the coasts that had been flooded. Is it possible that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were survivors of a catastrophe that erased their previous world? Is it possible that the pillars carved with animals and symbols were an attempt to preserve knowledge that would otherwise have been lost? And centuries later, when those survivors or their descendants descended to the plains of Mesopotamia and founded the first cities, did they carry that memory with them? Is that what the Sumerians remembered when they spoke of the world before the flood, of the sages who preserved knowledge through the catastrophe, of kingship that had descended from heaven? There exists a mountain in the most ancient Sumerian texts that appears repeatedly as a place of special significance. It is called Du-Ku, the sacred mountain. It was described as the place where the Anuna dwelt, the most ancient gods, even older than the Anunnaki of the later generation. Du-Ku was where civilization was born, where agriculture, animal husbandry, and weaving were created. Some scholars have proposed that Du-Ku might be a cultural memory of Göbekli Tepe. The similarities are tantalizing. Both are elevated places, sacred mountains. Both are associated with the origins of civilization, and both precede by millennia the Sumerian cities of the alluvial plain. The linguistic connection is also suggestive. In Turkish, tepe means hill or mound. In Sumerian, Diu can mean mound or mountain. Göbekli Tepe is in the same geographic region where botanical evidence suggests the domestication of plants that would eventually spread to Mesopotamia began. The oldest known domesticated wheat comes from Mount Karakada, only 30 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. If Du-Ku is Göbekli Tepe, then the Anuna who dwelt there would be the temple's builders, the peoples of the pre-pottery Neolithic period, and the Anunnaki who came later would be the inheritors of that knowledge, the students who learned from the ancient masters and then taught successive generations until the knowledge reached Eridu. This interpretation would resolve many paradoxes. It would explain why Sumerian civilization appears so suddenly in the archaeological record, apparently without a period of gradual development. It would explain why the Sumerians spoke of gods who had taught them everything. And it would explain why those gods had even more ancient masters, sages from before the flood, who had preserved knowledge through the catastrophe. The transmission of knowledge across generations is one of the most fundamental phenomena of human experience. Every culture, every civilization, builds upon the foundations of what came before. Even when earlier cultures are forgotten, Their influence persists in forms we often do not recognize. The words we use, the numbers we count with, the constellations we name. All these bear the imprints of minds that first thought these concepts thousands of years ago. The Sumerians were conscious of this chain of transmission in a way we often are not. They carefully recorded lists of sages and kings. They copied ancient texts with scrupulous fidelity. They rebuilt temples on the exact foundations of their predecessors. They understood that they were inheritors of something greater than themselves, guardians of knowledge that must be preserved for future generations. And now we are the inheritors. When we divide an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds, we are using the Sumerian sexagesimal system. When we divide a circle into 360 degrees, we are perpetuating a concept that originated on the banks of the Euphrates more than 5,000 years ago. When we look at the night sky and recognize the zodiac constellations, we are seeing the same patterns that the priests of Eridu observed from the roofs of their adobe temples. The chain has not been broken. Knowledge has flowed from generation to generation, from culture to culture, across millennia. And if the Sumerians were right, that chain extends much further back than our official history recognizes. It extends to the world before the flood, to the sages who emerged from the water, to the sacred mountain where everything began. There is an aspect of Sumerian knowledge that has puzzled scholars for more than a century. It is the mathematical system they used, a system that seems too sophisticated to have been developed from nothing. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal numeration system based on the number 60. Not the 10 we use, not the 12 some cultures use, but 60. Why 60? Because 60 is an extraordinarily practical number. It is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. No other small number has so many divisors. This system allowed performing complex calculations with an ease our decimal system cannot match in certain contexts. The Sumerians could divide quantities in halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths, and tenths without generating awkward fractions. It was perfect for trade, for resource distribution, for measuring time and space. And here is what is extraordinary. We still use it. An hour has 60 minutes. A minute has 60 seconds. A circle has 360 degrees, which is 6 times 60. When we look at a clock or use a compass, we are perpetuating mathematical decisions made in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago. The Sumerians' astronomical knowledge was equally impressive. They had mapped the zodiac constellations, those 12 sections of the sky through which the sun, moon, and planets pass. Each constellation occupied 30 degrees of the celestial circle, summing to the 360 degrees of the complete zodiac. They knew the 5 planets visible to the naked eye and had associated them with their principal deities. Marduk was Jupiter. Ishtar was Venus. Nergal was Mars. Ninurta was Saturn. Nabu was Mercury. They could predict the positions of these planets with considerable precision, following cycles they had observed for generations. But the most surprising thing about their astronomical knowledge is that they seemed to know phenomena that would require continuous observations over extraordinarily long periods of time to detect. The precession of the equinoxes is an astronomical phenomenon caused by the slow wobble of the Earth's rotational axis. This wobble causes the position of stars relative to the equinoxes to change gradually over time. A complete precessional cycle takes approximately 26,000 years. To detect precession, you would need to observe the stars for many generations and meticulously compare maintained records. A single human lifetime is not enough, not even several lifetimes. You would need an uninterrupted tradition of astronomical observation extending over millennia, and yet Mesopotamian texts show knowledge of this phenomenon. They divide the precessional cycle into 12 ages, each of approximately 2,160 years, corresponding to the 12 zodiac constellations. They speak of great years, spanning thousands of ordinary years. How could they have known this? How could civilizations supposedly just developing writing possess knowledge requiring continuous observations over periods exceeding their own documented history? One possible answer is that they did not invent this knowledge. They inherited it. They received it from masters who had been observing the heavens far longer than Sumerian records cover. They received it from the Apkallu, from the sages of the First World who had preserved knowledge from before the flood. This interpretation would explain why Sumerian astronomical knowledge appears so fully developed from the earliest texts. There was no period of experimentation and error, no gradual development. The system arrived practically complete, as if transmitted from an external source. The Egyptians also possessed astronomical knowledge that raises similar questions. The pyramids of Giza are aligned with extraordinary precision toward the cardinal points. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north with an error of barely 3 arc minutes. To achieve this precision without magnetic compasses, the builders would have needed profound knowledge of astronomy. And the 3 main pyramids of Giza, according to some researchers, are arranged in a pattern replicating the configuration of the 3 stars in Orion's belt. But not as they appeared when the pyramids were built, rather as they appeared approximately 12,500 years ago at the nadir of that constellation's precessional cycle. Coincidence? Misinterpretation? Or evidence that both Egyptians and Sumerians inherited astronomical knowledge from a common source reaching back to times far predating their own civilizations? We cannot be certain. The evidence is circumstantial, open to multiple interpretations. But the question persists. Where did this knowledge come from? Who developed it first? And how was it transmitted across millennia to reach the civilizations that first recorded it in writing? The sages of the abyss, according to Mesopotamian tradition, had taught all the arts of knowledge, not just agriculture and construction, but also observation of the stars, calculation of time, prediction of celestial movements. They were masters of cosmic wisdom, guardians of secrets spanning ages. Perhaps this is mere mythology. Perhaps the Sumerians simply projected their own achievements into a mythical past, attributing to gods and demigods what they had actually developed themselves through centuries of patient work. Or perhaps there is something more here. Perhaps the stories of the Apkallu preserve a genuine memory of real teachers who transmitted knowledge accumulated over countless generations. Perhaps the First World knew things we are only beginning to rediscover. In the deepest levels of Ubaid sites, archaeologists have found objects that have generated decades of speculation and debate. They are fired clay figurines representing humanoid figures, but with distinctly non-human characteristics. The most famous specimens come from the cemetery at Ur and the site of Eridu. They measure between 10 and 15 centimeters tall. They represent standing figures with slender bodies, broad shoulders, and narrow waists. But their heads are elongated, with prominent oblique eyes giving a reptilian or insectoid appearance. Their mouths are small, almost slit-like, and in some cases, female figures hold babies with the same non-human characteristics. It has been proposed that these figurines represent deities, spirits, deified ancestors, or simply aesthetic ideals of the Ubaid era. Some researchers have suggested the elongated head shape reflects the practice of artificial cranial deformation, which we know was practiced in some later Mesopotamian cultures. The bands placed around babies' heads to modify their shape would produce elongated skulls similar to those depicted in the figurines. But there are aspects of these figurines that do not fit completely with conventional explanations. The oblique, prominent eyes are not consistent with cranial deformation, and the paint markings on many figurines, which seem to represent tattoos or scarifications, suggest specific identities or roles we have been unable to decipher. What we know with certainty is that these figurines held important meaning for the Ubaid peoples. They were found in funerary contexts, placed alongside the bodies of the deceased. They were also found in domestic areas, possibly as objects of worship or protection. They were an integral part of the religious and ritual life of a culture that existed more than 7,000 years ago. And when we observe these almond-eyed, elongated-headed figures holding their equally strange-looking babies, we cannot help but wonder what exactly they were representing. Were they idealized self-portraits? Were they images of gods? Or were they representations of something they had seen, something they had encountered, something that had taught them the secrets of civilization? The Ubaid figurines remain silent. Like all material evidence from these lost cultures, they show us forms but do not reveal meanings. We can speculate, theorize, construct plausible narratives, but in the end, we are looking across an abyss of millennia at minds that thought in ways we may never fully understand. Around 4000 BCE, the Ubaid culture came to an end. It was not a sudden or violent disappearance. It was a gradual transition to something new, something archaeologists call the Uruk period. Uruk, the city that would give its name to an entire era. The first true city in history, with a population that at its peak would reach 40,000 inhabitants or more. The place where cuneiform writing was invented, the home of the legendary King Gilgamesh, whose epic would become one of the oldest and most influential literary works of humanity. The Uruk period represents a qualitative leap in social complexity. The villages and small cities of the Ubaid period gave way to massive urban centers with monumental architecture on an unprecedented scale. Temples grew into enormous complexes dominating the horizon. Palaces appeared, administrative buildings, warehouses to redistribute agricultural surpluses, and most significantly, writing appeared. First as simple accounting marks on clay tablets, recording quantities of grain, heads of cattle, jars of oil, then, gradually, evolving into a system capable of expressing abstract ideas, narrating stories, preserving memory for posterity. The Sumerians, the people whose language would become the first written language in history, emerged during this period. Their origin remains a mystery. Sumerian is not related to any other known language. It is not Semitic, like Akkadian, Hebrew, or Arabic. It is not Indo-European. It is a linguistic isolate, a relic of a past so remote that all related languages have disappeared without a trace. Some scholars have proposed that the Sumerians were descendants of the Ubaid peoples, that their language had evolved in the southern marshes during millennia of relative isolation. Others suggest they arrived from somewhere outside Mesopotamia, bringing with them a language already fully formed. The archaeological evidence does not definitively resolve the debate. What we do know is that when written history begins, around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians were already firmly established in southern Mesopotamia. They had built impressive cities, developed sophisticated administrative systems, created works of art of extraordinary beauty. And they looked back toward a mythical past extending far beyond their own era. They spoke of Eridu as the first city. They spoke of the 7 sages who had brought civilization. They spoke of the flood that had swept away an earlier world. They spoke of kings who had ruled for tens of thousands of years before the catastrophe. Were they inventing myths to explain their own origin? Or were they preserving genuine memories of real events reaching back to unthinkable times? We have traveled across millennia, We have followed the trail of cultures that left no written texts, that we know only through their material remains. We have explored mounds of rubble beneath which lie the foundations of temples rebuilt generation after generation for more than 1,500 years. We have contemplated almond-eyed figurines guarding secrets they will probably never reveal. And at the end of this journey, we arrive at an understanding that is both humbling and astonishing. Human civilization is much older than our traditional textbooks suggest. There is a first world that preceded everything we call history, a world of monumental temples built by hunter-gatherers who should not have been able to build them, a world of sophisticated cultures extending across immense regions, a world that was erased by climatic catastrophes and whose survivors had to start over. The Sumerians did not invent civilization, they inherited it. They were the custodians of knowledge that came from something earlier, and that something earlier, in turn, may have inherited knowledge from even more remote sources. The chain of transmission is lost in the mists of time, extending backward beyond our ability to see clearly. But there are echoes, there are resonances. The T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe resemble the stelae of Sumer. Motifs of serpents and scorpions appear in both places. The concept of a temple rebuilt again and again in the same sacred place is found at both Göbekli Tepe and Eridu. They are threads connecting eras separated by millennia, suggestions of a continuity that archaeologists are only beginning to glimpse. Before our journey comes to its close, I would love to know what other mysteries of antiquity you would like to explore in future nights. Are you intrigued by the origin of Stonehenge's builders? The secrets of the lost cultures of the Indus Valley? Or perhaps the civilizations that may have existed in the Amazon before the conquest? Your suggestions guide our next expeditions into the past. Leave them in the comments and let us see together what secrets still await to be revealed. The question that remains is perhaps the most important of all. What did we lose when the first world disappeared? What knowledge, what techniques, what understandings of the universe and of ourselves were erased by the waters of the flood, by the inexorable passage of time, by the forgetfulness of generations who no longer remembered what their ancestors had known? The Sumerians believed the Apkallu had preserved what was essential, that the wisdom of the earlier world had been transmitted through the catastrophe and delivered to humanity so they could rebuild. But even they recognized that something had been lost. The antediluvian kings had lived tens of thousands of years. Post-flood kings barely reached centuries. Something had fundamentally changed. The direct link to the divine had weakened. Humanity had been diminished. Perhaps this is merely mythology. Perhaps it is simply the way humans make sense of the passage of time, always imagining a golden age in the distant past when everything was better, when heroes walked among us, when the gods spoke directly with mortals. Or perhaps there is some truth in these accounts. Perhaps there was a time when humans knew things we have since forgotten. Perhaps the stone temples of Göbekli Tepe were built by people who understood principles we are still trying to rediscover. Perhaps the sages of the Sumerian texts were not merely mythological figures, but distorted memories of real teachers whose names and faces were lost, but whose teachings survived. We do not have definitive answers. We have only questions, fragmentary evidence, hints pointing toward mysteries we may never fully solve. But that is what makes this journey so fascinating. We are exploring the limits of the known, peering into the abyss of time, trying to glimpse the blurred forms of a world that existed before words existed to describe it. There is a paradox in our relationship with the remote past. On one hand, we feel completely separated from it. The cultures we have explored tonight existed thousands of years ago. They had no writing, did not have the technologies we take for granted, did not think in the ways we think. They are strangers to us, temporal aliens whose motivations and beliefs we can barely imagine, and yet we are their heirs. Everything we are was built on foundations they laid. The cities in which we live are descendants of the first cities that arose on the plains of Mesopotamia. The writing systems with which we record our thoughts evolved from marks that Sumerian scribes pressed into wet clay. The calendars by which we measure our days derive from observations that priests in adobe temples made gazing at the night sky. When we divide an hour into 60 minutes, we are perpetuating the Sumerian sexagesimal system. When we recognize the zodiac constellations, we are seeing the sky through Mesopotamian eyes. When we speak of floods and destructions, of lost worlds and golden ages, we are repeating narratives first told on the banks of the Euphrates more than 4,000 years ago. The chain of transmission has not been broken. Knowledge has flowed from generation to generation, transforming, adapting, but never disappearing completely. And that chain extends further back than we ever imagined. It extends to Göbekli Tepe, to the Halaf and Hasuna peoples, to the mysterious builders of the first world. Every time we learn something new, every time we discover a technique or formulate an idea, we are adding links to that chain. We are building on the work of all who came before. And someday, in a future we cannot foresee, others will build on what we leave behind. The Apkallu, if they ever existed as real beings, understood this. They understood that knowledge is precious, that it can be easily lost, that it must be actively preserved and transmitted. That is why they taught. That is why the Sumerians meticulously recorded lists of sages and kings. That is why they copied ancient texts with scrupulous fidelity. They knew they were guardians of something greater than themselves. We too are guardians. Each of us, simply by existing, by thinking, by communicating with others, is participating in the great chain of transmission connecting the most remote past with the most distant future. We are heirs of the first world, though we may not know its name. And we will be ancestors of future worlds that cannot yet imagine us. The ruins of Eridu remain there under the scorching sun of southern Iraq. The unfinished ziggurat rises over a landscape of sand and scrub, a monument to ambitions that were abandoned more than 4,000 years ago. Beneath its fired mud bricks, the deepest excavation levels still guard secrets archaeologists have not fully unraveled. Göbekli Tepe also remains there, in the mountains of southeastern Turkey. Only a small fraction of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures we will probably not see unearthed in our lifetime. The T-shaped pillars observe the sky with their stone eyes, keeping the silence they have kept for 12,000 years. The clay tablets recording Sumerian myths are scattered in museums around the world. The Weld-Blundell prism rests in Oxford. The flood tablets are in London. The cylinder seals, the Ubaid figurines, the Halaf pottery fragments, all wait in illuminated display cases, offering fragments of a story we can never fully reconstruct. There is a type of knowledge that can only be obtained from silence, from the act of contemplating something very ancient and allowing the magnitude of time to pass through us. The peoples who built these places lived lives as real as ours. They had fears and hopes, loves and losses, moments of joy and despair. They looked at the same sun we look at, walked under the same stars, and then they disappeared, leaving only stones and clay fragments to tell their story. We too will disappear someday. The buildings we construct will become ruins. The texts we write will become indecipherable to future readers. The names of our leaders and artists will be forgotten, as the names of the builders of Göbekli Tepe were forgotten. It is the nature of time. It consumes everything we touch. But something remains. Something always remains. The chain of transmission continues. Knowledge flows forward, transforming but never completely fading. What the peoples of the First World discovered, what the Sumerians preserved, what intermediate generations transmitted, all of this lives in us. We are the living legacy of worlds that no longer exist. And when we look back, trying to glimpse the first world through the mists of time, we are not merely satisfying historical curiosity. We are reconnecting with our own roots. We are remembering who we are and where we come from. We are honoring the ancestors who made us possible. When archaeologist Klaus Schmidt died in 2014, he left a legacy that transformed our understanding of human prehistory. But he also left a question he himself could never answer. Why? Why did hunter-gatherers who had barely developed agriculture invest incalculable resources in building stone monuments that served no apparent practical purpose? Why did they carve animals onto pillars they later deliberately buried? Why did they create a place that seems designed to endure for millennia? Schmidt believed the answer had to do with religion, with the human need to create sacred spaces where the mundane could meet the transcendent. First came the temple, then the city, he said. Spirituality, not economics, was the engine that drove the first steps toward civilization, but this answer only displaces the question. Where did that spirituality come from? What experiences, what visions, what encounters with the numinous drove those hunter-gatherers to embark on a project that would transcend them by millennia? There are researchers who have proposed bolder theories. Some suggest Göbekli Tepe was built to commemorate a catastrophic event, perhaps the impact of comet fragments that caused the cooling period known as the Younger Dryas. The animal sculptures might be representations of constellations, and certain pillars might encode astronomical information about the date of the cataclysm. Others have noted that one relief seems to show a headless figure surrounded by vultures. In many ancient cultures, exposure of the dead to carrion birds was a funerary practice known as excarnation. Was Göbekli Tepe a place of ancestor worship where the bones of the deceased were venerated after the flesh had been consumed by birds? The Sumerians had their own answer. They said the sages had come from the water, bringing with them the gifts of civilization. They said before the flood there had existed a different world, a world of long-lived kings and lost knowledge. They said everything they knew was a legacy from that first world. Were they right? Was there something before Göbekli Tepe? Was there a lost civilization whose survivors built temples in the mountains to preserve what remained of their knowledge? Or were the Sumerians simply mythologizing the natural process by which humanity gradually developed the tools of culture? We do not know. We will probably never know with certainty. The mysteries of the first world will remain as mysteries, defying our certainty, inviting us to speculate, reminding us that there are vast regions of the human past that remain unexplored. But that is all right. Mysteries have their own value. They keep us humble. They remind us that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more we do not know. They invite us to keep searching, keep asking, keep exploring the boundaries of the known. The first world existed. Of that we can be certain. It existed long before anyone wrote the word history. It existed in the mountains of Anatolia and the marshes of Mesopotamia. It existed in the hearts and minds of people who no longer have names, but whose actions resonated across millennia. And we are their heirs. We carry within us echoes of their dreams, fragments of their knowledge, traces of their footsteps through a world that has changed beyond all recognition, yet remains, fundamentally, the same world under the same stars. The moon illuminating your window tonight is the same moon the builders of Göbekli Tepe observed 12,000 years ago. The constellations turning in the sky are the same ones the priests of Eridu named and studied. Time passes, civilizations rise and fall, but the cosmos endures, indifferent to our small lives, yet witness to all we have been and all we will be. The first world left us more than we know. It left us the capacity to wonder about it, to seek it among ruins and fragments, to weave narratives connecting the present with the most remote past. It left us the curiosity that makes us human, the need to know where we came from in order to understand where we are going. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps we do not need all the answers. Perhaps the journey is more important than the destination, and the search more valuable than the finding. Perhaps the mystery of the first world is a gift, a permanent invitation to keep exploring, keep imagining, keep connecting with ancestors whose voices were lost, but whose legacy lives within us. The stones of Göbekli Tepe will continue to keep their silence. The ruins of Eridu will continue to wait under the desert sun. The Sumerian tablets will continue to tell stories of floods and sages and long-lived kings, and we will continue to ask, to seek, to dream of the first world, because that is what humans do. That is what we have always done, from the first who carved pillars in the mountains to the last who will write words not yet invented. We are the guardians of memory, the transmitters of knowledge, the heirs of the first world, and the ancestors of worlds to come. And tonight, in this moment, we are part of that chain connecting all that was with all that will be. We are the present link in a chain extending backward to the dawn of humanity and forward to the end of time. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to belong to history. This is what it means to inherit the first world.